Hi, and welcome to today's educational seminar entitled 5 Strategies to Improve Rack Safety. My name is Marc Rousseau, and I head up National Accounts and Strategic Partnerships at Damotech, North America's leading rack safety partner. So why are we here today? What's so important about rack safety? It comes down to a couple things. Racks are designed to be efficient structures that require components to be free of damage in order to ensure that the load placed upon them is done safely. Once we introduce damage of any sort to racking, if you look at the images on your screen, that sort of damage changes the whole game. We have now introduced a risk and a change in the integrity of that racking so that if left unattended, if we ignore that damage, it leads to fairly tragic consequences. So what we see on the screen now are collapses. Now, we're not showing you these things to make anybody scared, but we're trying to highlight the importance of addressing the damage that is in the warehouses today. So get away from the idea that it's a forklift running full tilt into your upright that's causing these things to topple. Oftentimes, and most times, it's repeated small damage over time. A little nick on the brace, a small damage on the front column that over time just reduces the integrity of that system. Now, what are the most common causes for this to take place? I just talked about one of them. So it's collisions with uprights and a forklift. So forklift running into an upright. We can't deny the fact that that's going to happen. The second part, I think it's important to know. Moving beams up or down, removing beams from that upright, or overloading the system. That introduces an element of risk that an engineer is supposed to verify. So you start moving components around, an engineer has to sign off. The third element, warehouse operational culture. Basically, and we all know this, as we pay employees to pick fast, as we pay employees to do their job faster, so we could put the product in a truck and distribute it, we are now imposing another layer of risk to the system. And I know we don't want folks to necessarily slow down as they pick, but nevertheless, we have to take that in consideration and understand that by trying to ask for speed, we are asking for additional risk to be imposed into the process. Now, the fourth element is turnover of employees and a lack of training. Folks will leave, come and go during peak periods especially. We're going to hire temporary staff that simply won't have the degree of training that other veterans will on the floor. So ensuring that those folks, as they come on board, even for a few weeks during Christmas, ensures that at least we're covering off that potential element of risk. And finally, the most important one in my view is complacency. It goes back to the few slides I just talked about. If we ignore the damage and choose not to do anything with the issues in our warehouse, we can go back to that potential collapse that we just talked about. So Damotech has developed a process including 5 strategies. Now, you may be on a different part of this spectrum in your facility today, but for the sake of today's presentation, let's all start on the first one, which is to inspect. Collect the data, identify the issues, and ensure you understand what's going on. Now, the second one is to take action. Use and leverage that data from the first strategy to ensure you're addressing the most critical things that you saw and identified in that inspection process. The third, we're now going to be proactive. We know which areas of our warehouse are potentially prone to damage, which are high velocity and low velocity. Take the time and the money to protect those assets from future damage. Now, fourth is to train, educate the staff, bring a degree of awareness to the situation, enable them to be able to identify damage and prevent it because they now understand the risks that's imposed by damage to their uprights. And finally, and in my view, the most critical of all these steps is to track and report. This is the control segment. This is where we ensure that we're making progress on all of these previous strategies. If we don't track the progress and report this success or the lack thereof, this is all for naught. So I will now hand it off to Charles Carbonneau, our chief engineer, to cover the first strategy.
Thank you, Mark. So let's look at why we should inspect pallet rack systems. Well, there's only one way. You really have to walk the aisles and look. If you have sensory devices on the forklifts or even on the pallet rack itself, it will not feel damages due to rubbing pallets against braces or seeing undetached beams or missing safety pins or even loose anchors. Also, there's only one way to confirm rack configuration of your installations. Through time, you may have had multiple changes, and at one point you lost count of who did what and where. In doing an inspection, you can look at the existing configuration that you have in the warehouse and compare it to the original engineering drawings. If these two don't match, it must trigger a request for an engineer to come in and certify these changes, or at least the original equipment manufacturer. Here's a very question. How often do you have to inspect your rack systems? There's no definitive answer to that question. It depends on the type of operation that you have. Emphasis should be placed on regular inspections and reporting damages. So here's what we propose. Yearly inspections by a third party providing an independent set of eyes to watch over your rack systems. These professionals can provide a baseline inspection because they've seen multiple different types of warehouses in different types of environment. Monthly inspections by trained employees is recommended by local authorities. To this, we add weekly inspections, especially in high traffic zones. Finally, daily inspections may be required for high pallet velocity locations. So what would you look at in terms of inspection? From afar, it's rather simple. There's 4 elements. You have anchors, columns, braces, and beams on which we put the pallets. But when we look closer, there's about 40 elements that you're looking at in terms of inspection for each single bay of your rack systems. The following resources can be found for free on our website. There is a pocket-size rack damage assessment book that you can carry around with you when you walk the facility. There's also a rack safety assessment guidelines poster that you can hang in the break and lunchroom for the employees. Finally, we provide a simplified rack inspection checklist that you can print before you head out to do your own inspections. Although simplified, these tools can guide you in finding out these issues and reporting them. The hardest part for employees doing inspections is actually figuring the priority level of the issues they observe. The design codes are not super clear in helping you decide that. We tend to split those into 4 categories. The first one being unload. If you see a very dangerous situation, please stop inspecting and ask someone to remove the loads from the racks and address these issues as soon as possible. Put yellow tape in place so that nobody puts back the pallets in place. The second level is high, and then we've got moderate and low priorities. So high priority is something that you need to address immediately, and you might have to do some partial unloading of pallets from the rack. Moderate level is something that is, in between, and you may want to address these issues within a time frame of 2 to 4 months. Low priority issues are those that, you saw a small scratch on the beams, a small dent perhaps. You take a note of it, but it doesn't need to be addressed immediately. If the rack hasn't collapsed, it doesn't mean that the damage is not significant. Remember that damage assessment is a complex task. If you are in doubt, remove some loads and call in an expert. Back to you, Marc.
Thanks, Charles. We're now at the second strategy of our process. We've taken all of this information, the great data from our inspection, we've synthesized it, we've now prioritized all the most critical issues that we want to address, we move into the second strategy, which is action. This is where the fun happens. This is where we fix the most critical issues that we found. Now, we're not looking to boil the ocean. The idea, go for the highest stuff first. Leave the others for another day. Two options are available to us today: rack replacement and rack repair. Now let's do a compare and contrast of the two. The first point we want to discuss is delivery. On the rack replacement side, we're looking at anywhere between 6 to 12 weeks for delivery. Quite honestly, today, you're well north of 12 weeks due to the conditions that we have. On the rack repair side, speaking for Damotech, we're at 3 to 6 weeks for delivery time. Unloading, considerable downtime for the replacement. You have to remove the product, remove the beams, and then remove the upright. Versus rack repair, with our technology at the very least, very little unloading required. You can leave the product in place, leave the beams in place, and perform the repair in record time. Now, from an installation standpoint, several hours to perform the installation of a new upright. Put that upright back in place, put the beams back in, and put all the product in place. In most cases, it's like a half day's worth of work. Again, compare that to the rack repair installation, and we're looking at 30 to 45 minutes. In some cases, less than that if it's a very short kit. Finally, repeat damage. On the replacement side, it's not about if it's going to get impacted again, it's when. On the rack repair, you have a built-in protection, and with Damotech, it comes with a lifetime impact warranty. If you go the route of a rack repair solution, 4 key things you want to remember. It has to be an engineered solution. First and foremost, that's the most important one of them all. 2, you have to restore load capacity of that position. 3, maintain the original configuration of that upright. And finally, opt for a bolted solution versus in-field welding. Now let's move on to the third strategy. Now that we've carefully taken care of action, let's now be proactive. Let's leverage the data that we found in the inspection, those low priorities that we kind of set aside. Let's look at those closer and now predict where we could have future damage. Now, in protection, it means to be proactive. So let's also break these up into 3 segments. We have people, product, and assets. On the people side, we're talking about pedestrian traffic. So folks that are walking in and around the warehouse that could come into contact with a forklift by accident, protect those walkways with fencing or guardrails. For product, wire mesh decking. So when you have product that could potentially fall through beams, or you have a tunnel situation where you have, whether it's a forklift driver or people walking, you can prevent that product from hitting someone. And on the other side of the house, we have pallets that could fall through and being pushed by a forklift. So we have netting that could be put to protect folks that are walking along the backside of a rack system to ensure that as product is pushed, that it's retained by that netting. Follow the OEM's recommendation for how to tie that netting into the upright, because if you put something that's not according to that OEM specs, something bad could happen. And finally, we have the assets. And for the assets, we protect 2 main things: the racking itself and building columns.
So why is employee training a key strategy? Well, we know that just being told to be safe is not enough. We're not necessarily wired to get the message and transform it into a permanent action. Better behavior comes from the following points I'm going to list out. So awareness of regulations like the building code, the rack design code, the fire safety code, ability to recognize risks like damages to your uprights and beams, missing safety pins perhaps, loose anchors, understanding the consequences also of these elements like changing beam elevations, perhaps the accumulated damages that you have in your warehouse. And lastly, we want to point out the importance of the company culture that greatly influence safety. According to OSHA, effective training can reduce accidents involving forklifts by a factor of about 30%. Now, this is very significant when you compare the investment versus the benefits it brings you. Let's have a look at some other benefits of training your workers on rack safety. So the first one was, we just heard about it, it reduces injuries. It reduces maintenance costs. It reduces liability with perhaps a lower insurance premiums. It can extend the life of your racks, of course, and you can avoid OSHA fines. They can also support you on initiatives to change the safety culture. A simple example is to create a poster of family photos with the title above it, "Why We Work Safe." This connects a positive emotion to employee behavior. So who should be trained on rack safety? Well, we believe that all levels should be trained. Senior management may be more concerned with driving a safety culture, and middle management like safety operations and maintenance managers may have more specific needs. Forklift operators may be trained more specifically on what type of damage can occur and what the consequences of these damages have on the behavior of the rack systems. Now, let's move on to the fifth strategy in our list. It is track and report. So why should we track and report? It brings clear communication through the chain of command. Everyone is aware of the state of the racking systems. It drives accountability at these levels because there's no excuse. You're supposed to know we have a system in place. And it builds a timeline of the issues that you've seen on these racking systems. So what should we track and report? LARCs are the load application and rack configuration drawings. These are the stamped engineering drawings that you got when you initially bought and installed the rack system. These have to be maintained. You have to keep and records of your inspection reports, all of the known issues with the racks, modifications and repairs that were done on these racks through the years, and of course, employee training records. Damotech has developed a web platform that helps you keep track of issues with the racking systems. You can get statistics out of this. You have the number of uprights, the number of issues, how many are of high priority, moderate, and low priority. You can also see what type of issues dominate this warehouse. So in the example that we have in front of us, columns, braces are the main issues. Now this interface also gives you access to all of the pictures that we're taking during inspection. And you also have a form of layout where you see with red dots everything that is of high priority. You have a list of uprights with their location, the naming convention that you are using yourself inside the warehouse. There's also detailed information for each issue. You have categories, what element is concerned, what component of the rack is damaged, for example, what kind of damage, a priority level, and a picture, or multiple pictures. The layout view shows you the entire facility with larger dots if you have more issues in there. And of course, they are red if they're high priority, orange for moderate, and yellow for low priority issues. There is also a layout view where you can see the load capacity of the systems in the warehouse. And there's an elevation view to see the detailed information about the load capacity for every level and every bay of each system.
Hey, thank you, Charles. So let's now recap the 5 strategies that we just went over. So the process as we've laid it out, and I'm hoping you've come to understand and appreciate. First, we've inspected. We've collected data. We're getting knowledgeable about our racking, and we're understanding what's going on. Secondly, we're taking action. We're addressing the most critical issues in our warehouse to make it all safe. Third, proactive. Let's protect the assets ahead of time before damage takes place. Fourth, we're training. we're educating folks on the importance of rack safety. And finally, 5, the 5th strategy that we have in our process is to track and report. Control this process by ensuring we understand the progress that we have made. Now, in terms of next steps, I highly encourage you to go to our website. We have a rack safety guide, great blogs that have been written by engineers, and downloadable free content that'll help you navigate through this rack safety process. And additionally, for those that want to understand where they sit in the spectrum of rack safety at your warehouse, we have a quiz that you can take. So you go to damotech.com/quiz, take the quiz, understand what your rating is and your score, and then take the steps necessary to get onto a safe operating workplace. Thank you.